The regular meeting of the Del Norte Solid Waste Management Authority, City of Crescent City, and the County of Del Norte, State of California. The Solid Waste Board Authority of the City of Crescent City and the County of Del Norte in the State of California is now meeting in regular session. Only those items that indicate a specific time will be heard at the assigned time. All items may be taken out of sequence to accommodate the public and staff availability. I would like to bring to the front item number 5.1. We will take that up right after we do public comments in order to accommodate the public.
Roll call in second.
Yeah, we can do a silent roll call, please. Okay, so let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Gastineau, would you like to lead us off?
Sure. Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome, Mr. NAFTA. It's so nice to have 5 people to have all of the seats warm. I think that might make it an easier life in the future. Okay, public comment. Any member of the public may address the Solid Waste Management Authority on any matter on or off of the agenda. After receiving recognition from the chair, please state your name for the record. Any public comment? Okay, let's move on to item 5.1, which is discussion and possible action regarding letters from Hambro WSG and Dry Creek Landfill regarding negotiations for extension of the transfer operations and landfill disposal agreements.
I'd be happy to introduce this one.
Please. Sorry, I went right to
I
last.
absolutely welcome Mr. White to come to the podium and add anything that I may have missed. But essentially, as the negotiations continued about the extension of both the transfer station operations agreement and the disposal agreement with Dry Creek Landfill, Mr. White raised several additional issues that had not yet been discussed with the authority board, and so I wanted to raise these issues and hopefully get your approval to incorporate them into the continuing negotiations. So they are detailed in the letter that's in your agenda, but essentially the points are these. First, that they believe they would like the agreement to be modified not by a change order, but by a formal amendment to the agreement, which will include more details. There are 2 provisions that currently enable the authority to reserve the right to terminate at any time within 12 months' notice after the 15th year of the agreement, and there's another provision that allows the authority to terminate any of the services with 30 days notice. So those were in the agreement from the beginning, and since we're looking at an extension, those were contract provisions that Hambro WSG would prefer to have stricken from the agreement. The other issue that they raise is that the Dry Creek Landfill has experienced several changes in law that will, they are requesting an increase of 58 cents per ton starting July 1st, 2016. And so that is also a new request that was not previously incorporated into the negotiations. So staff are looking for authorization to include those in the negotiations. And finally, I'd also request the potential for some flexibility in terms of the extension date, in that previously we did discuss the benefits to the community of extending this agreement, and it seems that we might be able to extend this by a few more months than what is currently negotiated. So that's the reason for bringing all of these things forward. I'd be happy to answer any questions and welcome Mr. White to discuss the issues.
If I may, the 2 items that were the Dry Creek Landfill, and there was one other item that Ted didn't mention, and that was the we need to reach somehow an agreement on how we're going to address this $15 minimum wage. Both of those price increases occurred subsequent to our first discussion, so I had no idea those were even coming. But since they are, they're there, and we have to deal with them. With respect to the language that we're requesting to be stricken, there's about 10 pages, I believe, from page 49 to 59 in the agreement that deals with breach of contract, default, areas of performance, if we're negligent there. So we believe there's plenty of language in there, and that these two specific portions of the contract, which basically gives the authority, from our viewpoint, unilateral right to cancel the contract at any moment, are difficult for us to take, because if we try to, my rationale is, we need to go out and probably get some loans to make some capital improvements. With that language in there, I think any bank that read that or any lending institution would have difficulty with it. So that's my rationale behind that. So my hope is that we can move forward with that, and we'll see where it goes. Be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? The increase, the 50 cents, can you explain that, what he was saying?
The DEQ came through and levied against the landfill that increase. And there's another subsequent land increase, July 1st of 16, and then I can't remember when the other one was.
July 1st of 2019, they're
Yeah.
looking at a 7 cents per ton increase as
So
well.
it's rather small. My hope was we could just pass that through and just say, okay, instead of, I don't know what the exact rate is, but let's say 150, it's 158, and then the next time it comes up, add another 7 cents or 17 cents, whatever the DEQ is requesting from the landfill. Landfill's not putting any markup on it. I wouldn't put any markup on it. And there's government mandated. That's my hope, that we can just pass that through.
That makes sense, except for when we see what water quality mandated for us to pay for the landfill. Would you push that one through too?
I wish I could.
So what's the pleasure of the board? I think this is possibly an opportunity to put together a little ad hoc committee, write it up into formal language, and spend some time with that ad hoc committee, can look at those pages 48 through 59 and take a look at the contract, because if we're going to do any tweaking of the contract, if we wanted to do some, now would be the time to do it. And it's such an educational process, because you really get to see where's the beef in relationship to contracts. So anyone want to do that? I know the contract. I'm just trying to give it opportunity, because I think that, okay. Okay. I'll help. Okay, so I don't think we have to take any formal vote. We can just give direction that an ad hoc committee, along with staff, would like to prepare formal amendments to the agreement and/or change order.
Yes, and I would be happy to communicate by email and decide, and work with the ad hoc committee to decide when and how they
And
want to
what kind of
engage.
timeline are we on?
Well, we really need to have a contract amendment at the next meeting, because these changes will be part of the rate ordinances that would be going into effect starting July 1st.
Okay.
The change in, instead of a change order or the other term that they use, it's just legal stuff.
Yeah,
And I don't
it's either
care.
an amendment to the agreement
I
and/or
don't care
change
which
order.
one it is. It's a,
Yeah, whichever
all I
we
care about
decide.
is legal. The other thing I wanted to mention, two things, was June 4th, we've got the mattress recycling event coming up. We're excited about that. And we also took our first load of clothing from the transfer station floor, which we pulled. We had 480 pounds in 1 month, so we're happy that that program started. And it's being accepted. We didn't have one rejection, so thumbs up on that.
Cool,
So,
that's
thank you.
good to hear.
To be clear, the textile recycling rate would also be going into effect July 1st. They were just doing a test to make sure that their quality was good and that they were separating. So while those textiles were recycled and we're excited about that, no one actually has gotten a price break for recycling their textiles yet, as that would be going into effect July 1st.
Perfect. Okay, well, that will bring us back to the consent agenda, which are items 1.1 through item 1.7.
Motion to approve.
There's been a motion to approve the consent. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any public comment on the consent agenda only? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. Does the board have any comment on any agenda items? Hold the vote, please.
Commissioner Howard,
Yes.
Commissioner Inscore,
Yes.
Commissioner McClure,
Yes.
Commissioner Gastineau,
Yes.
Commissioner Naffa,
Yes.
Okay, that brings us to item 2, which is the Director Treasurer reports. And we'll start with 2.1, which is the Director's report.
Because of the limited amount of time available at today's meeting, we'll be taking this at a rapid clip. At what point should we address the additional items?
Oh, I forgot.
Probably now? Okay. There were 2 items that arose subsequent to the posting of the agenda that would both be closed session items. I've asked legal counsel to draft language describing those items. Martha?
So I start to answer.
So the two items to be considered for addition to the agenda are one, conference with legal counsel regarding anticipated litigation pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D. We have one case there, as well as conference with legal counsel regarding threat to public services or facilities pursuant to Government Code Section 54957. Because these are urgency items, the determination of urgency will also be made in closed session, but it's a good time to make the public aware that we will be moving into closed session to possibly consider these items, I believe, at the end of the meeting.
Do we need to take a vote to do that, or does that happen in
We
closed
will
session?
do that in closed session.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Okay.
Okay, then we
Very
will
good.
now come back to 2.1, which is the Director's report.
Okay. All right, so the director's report, mostly the content of the director's report summarizes many of the items in today's agenda. One of the pivotal items that I want to make the board aware of is we're right at the edge regarding the residential samples that were collected at the landfill. Attached to the director's report is a letter from the State Water Resources Control Board saying that the outstanding balance of our unpaid waste discharge requirements fees will be referred to a collections agency if they do not receive payment by May 9th, 2016, and I would insert, or they receive word from the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board staff that our threat and complexity rating has been reduced, and therefore the amount of waste discharge requirements fees would also be reduced. So the reason why I say we're right at the edge is that we have conducted those samples. We have just received the analysis of those samples, and then the additional step that we need to go through is we need to send those to a water quality engineering firm that we have, Lawrence and Associates, to compile their assessment and send that report to Gina Morrison of the Regional Water Quality Control Board, who will then make a determination. All of this needs to happen before May 9th. At this point in time, I believe that we are close enough that it's still prudent action to not pay the balance of the waste discharge requirements fee, and because test results generally look good, but I am depending on the analysis of our water quality engineer, and she needs to do just a little bit more analysis. So at the previous meeting, we added an urgency item and essentially authorized the chair to work with me to pay the outstanding balance if that's required. And so we may pursue that action yet still, but at this point in time, I'm not recommending that we immediately pay based on the data that looks pretty good. So it's still a bit of a gamble, and I want you all to be fully informed, but it is right on the edge. And the reason that we're really pushing this to the edge is the presumption that I still think is true, that if we pay the fee, actually getting it back through a refund process is much less likely than if we hold on to the fee and then actually get a determination that it's not due. then I just think that's a more secure way of holding on to the agency's
Well, and I'm
resources.
pretty certain that if it is sent to collections, then collections does a little processing, and then they send us a little note that says you've got X number of days. So hopefully, by the time all of that happens, we'll have a good report and not have to pay the money.
So the board security, the outstanding amount that's due is still $26,566, and we do have the amount in that budget line. So there wouldn't be a problem paying it should we decide to do so. Other items, any further questions on that particular issue?
I did.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So if we get the test results and we're happy with that, and we tell them we have the test results, would we still have to pay by May 9th something, or will they go ahead and, figure out exactly what that amount is and then let us know, and then we can address it at the next board meeting?
We've already paid the amount that would be appropriate for a threat and complexity rating of 1B. Officially, we're at 1A, and the Regional Water Quality Control Board staff person has said that if we were able to demonstrate that we're not impacting the adjacent residential wells, that she's willing to temporarily drop us to a 1B until our waste discharge requirements are revised, which may actually be a couple-year process. So she's already stated that she's willing to do that, but what's necessary to get to that point is for us to submit a report from a water quality engineer that provides convincing assessment that we are not impacting those residential wells. So that's the additional step that we have to go through. And there isn't an amount that we would have to pay because we've already paid the 1B amount. So the amount is essentially either we have to pay the full remaining balance or we've already paid all that we have to pay.
Good. Chair? Would it be worth pursuing an extension?
We have applied for an appeal, and as far as I'm aware, there is no extension mechanism.
There is.
There is none. There is, just as they have no official appeals process, there is no official extension process.
So, no
Could be
time,
state agency.
no appeal.
Okay,
Okay?
I agree with the assessment.
Moving on, the Green Ribbon Awards were presented during the Youth and Family Fair last Saturday. Thank you to Chair McClure, and to congratulations to the winners. We've started training Bridget Hines, and who's nearly completed her training, and we're hiring and starting to train a new employee, Darren Davis, starting the last week in April. The negotiations with the Del Norte Solid Waste Management Authority Employees Union, represented by SEIU Local 1021, has continues, and the status of those negotiations has already been addressed within the proposed budget that we'll be talking about later in the meeting. And later on this evening, I will be presenting the grant proposal from the Solid Waste Authority to the Resource Advisory Committee. Again, trying to keep this brief. I'd be happy to highlight any other issues if there are questions. Okay?
Questions?
All right, moving on. You see the usual treasures and accounting reports that we always include. Our cash balance in the bank is currently $604,384, plus the last payment from the transfer station, which is $198,177. Looking through the financial reports, you can see, as usual, the largest amount of our claims approved by director are the regular payments to Hambro WSG. The other larger expenses are usually associated with landfill water testing and some of the dumpsters that we pay for on behalf of the city and the county. Looking at our revenues, I'll jump to the back because this is also relevant for the budget assessment. Again, we have two primary sources of revenue: the authority service fees, which is approximately 1/3 of the revenues at the Del Norte County Transfer Station. And at this point in time, we are $10,779 ahead of budget, or 1.42% ahead of budget. And so the budget for the coming year anticipates that those revenues will stay at a 1.4% growth. And so we've taken this budget amount for this year, which was $997,000, and then increased that by 1.4%. In addition to the 58 cents per ton, because we anticipate that that will also be incorporated into the budget for next year. And then the franchise fees are also coming in ahead of budget. Currently, we're 15,267 ahead of budget in franchise fees, which is 7.76% ahead of what we had budgeted. And so, again, to be conservative, in the budget for next year, we've increased the anticipated revenues from franchise fees by 6%, just to be conservative. So that's the financial reports. Any questions on those? Unfortunately, Mr. Taylor was not able to be here today.
So the 6% increase is going to it rolls into our new budget also?
That's correct. That's correct.
And that's a conservative increase?
It is, because currently we're seeing that we're over 7% ahead of budget, but I'm only increasing next year's budget by 6%.
Okay. Questions? Questions from the public? Questions from the board?
I just have one question, Ted, and I don't know if we've talked about this before, but what is our thought on looking at the accounts that are past due, these that are noted as closed businesses? At some point in time, are we going to take action to remove those from the books? I just wondered.
Well, first of all, that's a really good question. And you can see in our AR aging summary, you can see the account balances that are over 30 days, 31 to 60 days. You'll notice there's 0, 61 to 90 days. And then the ones that are over 90 days have already been referred to collections. So there's a periodic process in which those are taken off our books. That hasn't happened just yet. But the other ones, essentially, we're up to date. And Lisa Babcock is doing a good job making sure that our accounts are paid up.
Okay, good, thank you.
Any other questions? Do we need to, yes, let's pull the vote to accept these claims, or?
No, there's actually no
They're
action
already
at this
done.
point,
Okay.
yeah. I'll try to stay at a good clip. So that concludes the items under item 2, and we're ready to move to item 3.1.
Okay.
Okay. Item 3.1 is a report on the site security and efforts to reduce off-road vehicle access to the Crescent City landfill. Good news and bad news. So there was a tree that fell down across one of the roads that we regularly use, and in good partnership with the road department, they not only took down that tree and used some of the resulting logs to block off some of the access roads that have been problems, but in their enthusiasm and in our identifying a communication issue, they also blocked one of the roads we regularly used for water testing. So we kind of have to undo some of that progress, but it shouldn't take very long to do that. So good and bad. Some of the access roads that had been used are blocked off. Others need to be unblocked, and then we'll be able to strengthen some of the block-offs we have. But anyway, good continuing partnership with the road department. And we are making progress in that. Additionally, we are working with 2 guys looking at trying to improve what I call the choke gate, which is the gate near the previous entrance gate when the landfill was open, because that is an area that if we're able to block that off, that will stop a lot of the traffic that's going through the landfill. But the gating is a challenge in that it's not visible from the road. And so people who are interested in defeating that gate generally have a lot of time to work with. We are still exploring the possibility of using game cameras so that we might be able to gather photographic and video evidence, and we're exploring how useful that might be in prosecutions. So we are taking that issue seriously and trying to chip away at it. Mr. Howard, do you have anything to say about the work you've done with Parks on that?
I don't have anything to add. We're working on getting another 2x2 together, and we had worked with Brett Silver previously, and I have not received a report back from him on what actions they have taken to date.
Okay. If there's any way that we can be of assistance with that, please let us know.
Questions? Spike strips were suggested down here.
Okay.
Okay.
But
Sorry, spike strips is what they said.
you know, I actually asked our code enforcement officer as to whether or not that would be possible, and he was very clear it was not okay.
No, that would be like digging a pit that someone was going to fall into.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to do that.
So we're dissuaded of pursuing that particular angle.
Okay, well, then that brings us to 6.1,
Okay.
which is the draft budget.
Right. So, under our joint powers agreement, this is the time for us to prepare our budget. It's well ahead of the county budget process, and we are still following the joint powers agreement as it stands, which means that after your preliminary review of this proposed budget, then I present it to the City Council and the Board of Supervisors for their review and possible comment. It is a balanced budget, meaning that the revenues and the expenses are equal. Could I have the PowerPoint, please? So here are our revenues. You can see that approximately 2/3 of the revenues at the Del Norte County Transfer Station go to Hambro WSG for their operations services. Authority service fees, which are our portion of the gate fees, are a little over over $1,018,000. The franchise fees are projected to be $256,520, and then we have additional revenues of $46,761. Next slide, please. Regarding our expenses, you can see again, the bulk of the expenses are for transfer station operations. And those numbers don't exactly match because Hambros is paid for the disposal of items from Klamath and Gasky. And of course, those revenues are not collected at Del Norte County Transfer Station, but they're collected separately at each of those facilities. Salaries and benefits is the largest portion of the authority's costs. Again, this does incorporate the current status of negotiations with the employees union. Transfer station loan payments are the next biggest portion there, and then moving on down the line, we've got funded depreciation. Again, as a joint powers authority, the authority is required to set aside cash for depreciation expenses, so next year that'll be $96,500. We have $63,835 for the inter-fund cost plan, so that's essentially the authority's payment for the services that we use through the county. Those are for personnel, for the county auditor, for the payment of claims, for IT, presenting this in a meeting and putting it on video. And we appreciate all of those services. But it did go up by $10,386 just from last year. So that's a pretty big increase. And it's a good chunk of change. The next item in terms of cost is our permit fees, $57,171. That's a status quo estimate of permit fees. So that is not anticipating a reduction, but it's sort of splitting the difference in that the current waste discharge requirements are somewhat discounted because they had an accumulation of cash, and so they didn't charge the full amount, and it's possible that those fees will go up next year. $32,000 is for permit fees. The household hazardous waste, no, I'm sorry, $32,000 is for the household hazardous waste event. $30,000 for well monitoring expenses, $11,125 for OPEB, and then all the other expenses total a little less than $200,000. I'd be happy to answer any questions about the proposed budget.
Questions? I should ask the public, bring it back from the public. Questions? Supervisor Howard? I don't think anybody wanted to get up.
You know, I did want to spend some more time taking a look at this in hopes that it wouldn't be a wrestling match once it got to our respective bodies north of us. And I do have some questions. I just don't know. Once this draft is approved, then it goes to the
Then it goes to
county
the
and city.
supervisors at the
So the
or the
decision-
county and city, if they have things that they would like us to reconsider, it comes back. But we don't have to reconsider, but we do reconsider.
That's correct, and it can be changed up until the very final adoption. So all of those comments can be addressed, or any questions. And if you have any questions now that you'd like to be brought to the future meeting, I'd be happy to do that.
But if, we're not being asked to approve the draft tonight, correct?
Final approval will come after review by the city and the county.
Okay,
But if there are no changes that are made at today's meeting, then the budget before you is the budget I will bring to the
Right.
city and the county.
and I've just got a lot of little nitpicky type questions, and they may or may not be appropriate for this discussion, but if you don't mind it.
Go for it. I would rather have the questions
Okay.
asked than
The
confusion to
you-
follow.
The professional well monitoring service piece of $30,000, that's not something we conduct currently in-house?
That's correct. That is primarily laboratory analysis of water quality samples that we collect. And it's gone down slightly because we don't anticipate having to do the residential sampling next year. But those are laboratory expenses. At
that
various
market-
times, we have been encouraged to try to explore the potential for possibly using the wastewater treatment lab for some of these samples. And logistically, it just doesn't work very well. In part because many of the analytes that we're looking at the landfill are not the kind of thing that are regularly analyzed at the wastewater treatment plant. And other things that they do analyze, they need setup time for, and so it doesn't, they require things on a certain schedule, and that's not necessarily how the data is collected.
And who does the analysis currently?
North Coast Laboratories.
North Coast Labs does. And
Chris,
so-
when you have a question, could you tell me the line number you're asking from? It would just be helpful.
20232. And then I'm going to assume just directly above that 20231, the professional service, is that specifically the Janine Galatioto?
That would be one of them, but I anticipate that particular service being done this year. I'm not actually looking for a very large number of professional services that we're using next year compared to this year. This year, we currently have an agreement with Lawrence and Associates to do the water quality engineering. We currently have an agreement with Janine Galatioto. We have another agreement with Richard B. Davis to do a landfill survey, and none of those activities I anticipate continuing on to next year.
And just flipping back again to the water quality piece, that's a state requirement,
Which
the $30,000?
the laboratory analysis is a requirement in that we're required to report regarding the concentration of certain analytes, such as, say, bicarbonate alkalinity. So we collect water in a bottle, and we send it off to North Coast Labs. They do the analysis, and they tell us what was the concentration of bicarbonate alkalinity in that particular sample. And they do that for a variety of analytes.
How often do we submit?
It's dictated under our water quality and monitoring program from the Regional Water Quality Control Board. We sample surface water 3 times a year, and we do groundwater monitoring twice a year at
So
a
these are
variety of wells.
Very expensive tests then.
It is. They are expensive, and some of them, they look for things like volatile organic compounds that are not, for instance, the kind of things that one would sample for if you're trying to determine whether or not your groundwater well is producing adequate quality water, but it is the kind of thing that indicates some impact associated with landfill activity. So if somebody dumps some solvents, then that's a concern to everybody, and we want to make sure that the groundwater surrounding the landfill is not impacted by those kinds of things.
Understood.
Can I just interject just for a second about this one issue? Would it be of value to possibly revisit this issue of sampling and testing with the city again? Sometimes, just my experience so far is sometimes we don't always communicate as well as we should or could. And one of the goals with the new lab was to be able to provide these types of services specifically to local. And I just think that, I think it's worth a conversation if it's something that can be scheduled, and if it's something that's, obviously they're not going to go away. If you're going to continue to be doing this long-term, then it might be worth it from the city's standpoint to address how can we be prepared to do these tests if we know they're going to be done every month and then you have a local partner here to be able to do that. I just think that maybe the conversation is worth having again, even if it doesn't go anywhere.
I'd be happy to have that conversation again, but based on my previous explorations of this, I have to say that I'm not particularly hopeful, just because I'm aware of the sequence of activities that's necessary on both sides, having talked it through. But I would be happy to explore that possibility again, just to make sure that there isn't an opportunity that we're missing.
And if there needs to be some encouragement to look for ways to work better together, then that's part of the responsibility that we have as part of this JPA, is to say, well, maybe we should rethink how we do things if we can all work together and accomplish more for our community. So I would certainly be inclined to express my desire to see us do that, so.
Okay?
And I kind of agree with what the director is saying. I've had a similar experience on the professional side of my business.
Well.
And they just couldn't do the kind of testing that was required. It would be really, really nice if you did have that conversation someday, because some of those services would be great to have here versus going all the way to Arcata.
And I know that part of the challenge is that we're somewhat accustomed to pulling the samples when we can get it together to pull the samples.
Sure.
And then just expecting the analysis to be there for us, which doesn't necessarily work with the way the wastewater treatment plant works.
But if we could save some money, we could make.
I
And if we
reiterate,
could-
I am happy to have this
If we could schedule and if we
conversation.
could coordinate it, I'm not saying we can. I just think that sometimes we hit roadblocks because of communication problems as opposed to it being not possible. And I would like for us to facilitate as much collaboration as we can.
Not to mention that if the city makes a small investment now, they can make more money in the future, so. we
And
can
that
look
was
at it
part of
on
the rationale behind building that lab as it was anyway. It's something we've taken some heat from the public about. And if we can find a way to work together, if it doesn't put an undue burden on the authority to be more proactive in scheduling where they do the samples, and we can all do this, it really becomes a win-win for all of us, I think. So-
Plus, I think the county's well monitoring is still going south. You know, when the CDD requires someone to test their water at their well, we send it to Eureka, where we could actually have maybe an employee in Delaware County earning a living wage.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
So do you have more questions
Thank you very
on
much
the-
for that.
on the
Sorry,
budget?
I didn't mean to
Commissioner Howard?
sidetrack this, but go ahead.
I like the discussion.
Okay, well,
Sorry, Chair.
you know me.
No, that's good. Those were 5 steps forward.
20200 memberships. What is it?
The biggest hunk of that is the Environmental Services Joint Powers Authority of the Regional Council of Rural Counties,
RCRC.
RCRC, the ESJPA of RCRC. That's $6,000. In addition, we generally give money to the California Product Stewardship Council, which we're a member of, Californians Against Waste, and the California Resource Recovery Association. All of those are directly affiliated with our industry or our business or our interest in legislative advocacy.
Definitely need to stay in tune. 20140 household expenses.
Cleaning supplies, janitorial supplies, those sorts of things.
For the office?
Yeah, their office supplies are actually a separate thing, but generally household expenses are the kinds of things to maintain the facility and the buildings and the cleanliness, and office expenses are more in the production of our work products.
Do you do contracted cleaning services?
No, it's janitorial services are another duty or opportunity for more hours of some of our employees.
Okay. Nothing wrong with that. The communication line item just above that, 20121.
That includes our online service fees and our cell phones.
Okay. Expensive. How many cell phones do you have out there?
Well, we have an on-call phone. There are three phones, I believe so, paid for by the authority. The on-call phone, my phone, 4 phones.
And then the phone into the system phone.
The in-house.
Right.
Right.
Sorry if I'm rushing.
No, this is
Trying to
fine.
respect
Well,
your
that's-
time.
I appreciate the detailed conversation, sir.
The Special Department Expense 20285.
Those are generally the things that don't fit easily into other categories. Let's see. Just as a somewhat silly example, when we were doing the outreach during the Youth and Family Fair, we wanted to call attention to our plastic bags recycling program, and so we bought a Bag Monster costume, for example. That's a special department expense because it doesn't really fit into anything else.
Okay.
I thought you made that. I was so impressed.
And this
That's
city
cool.
thing, this city collection,
Number?
Well, that's a...
that's 20288.
We are actually actively working to try to bring that one down. The biggest piece of that is the dumpster behind the cultural center, and that's currently being collected twice a week. And that frequency of collection really is only justified when there's some kind of weekend activity. And so we're working with the city to try to either reduce the size of that dumpster or reduce the frequency of collection, but we believe that expense is higher than we can stomach. We're currently overshooting the budget as we stand. We're working with the city, but we're not quite at the stage of taking the next step on that.
Have we taken them recycling containers yet?
That was part of the discussion.
'Cause I
Like I
think
said,
that would
we're
be
sort
very
of
helpful.
mid-discussion on that. And there are a number of issues to be dealt with, such as the possibility of locking the bin, because it is an area that has
Yes, it
been...
is.
Yeah, this does not seem like this is that hard of a thing that we got to get.
A lock.
We can get over this.
Thank you, sir.
That dumpster left open just becomes a public place to dump things because of its size. We need to drop that to, even when there's an event, that thing does not, I mean, with the exception of maybe a 4th of July something, or like Sea Cruise when they did the blues and cruise, and you have a lot of people coming and going. Other than that, and we can drop an extra dumpster if we have a big event. That could be a 1-yard dumpster locked for the chamber and whatever happens there on a regular basis. Having that dumpster there is not necessary, and city just needs to get this.
You know, just you saying that brought an idea to my head, and that would be that you just have the 1-yard dumpster for the chamber locked, and on event days, you drop whatever has been ordered, and the event organizer actually pays for their trash service.
We are currently exploring options with the city.
That's as much as you can
We
say,
are
okay.
mid-discussion. Just to add just the details about some of these things. The locked bin challenge, for example, there are a number of different city departments or city activities that then use that bin, so we want to make sure everybody has keys, those kinds of things.
I will then
You're on
offer
it.
what I said before. If you need some help with motivating this discussion and moving it along, please let me know, because these are no-brainer things that we should be able to just do.
Thank you, sir.
Sorry.
Continue on.
20301.
20301?
Yes, just to
State
seek some
fees.
clarity, this would be the 1B
Yes, this
and
is-
not necessarily 1A.
It's actually includes a few fees in there, but the biggest piece is it's actually the 1A rating, but it is status quo, meaning, and it's a little confusing.
Okay, yeah.
But essentially, the fee for this year was over $70,000, and because they had accumulated a cash surplus, they actually reduced the amount that was due this year, but they made it very clear that they anticipate it's going to go back up next year. So it's sort of splitting the difference. And
So
that-
is this number, what is this anticipating?
This is anticipating that it comes in at exactly what it was this year.
So it's not anticipating the reduction?
That is correct.
Okay, good.
That's a safe way to go.
Well, yeah. It's always good to have extra money.
I'm still a little confused on 70530, the inter-fund cost plan. Walk me through that one.
Well, I wish I had more detail on that, but essentially, there are several numbers in this budget that come directly from the county auditor's office. And in this case, that's where this one comes from, and it is their apportioned share of our costs for personnel expenses and the auditing service and the ability to pay claims. And I have to say that
Every department has.
it's a little challenging from a
Well, it's-
number of different perspectives. One is that when, say, for example, when we're in negotiations, as we are now, and we really need somebody from the personnel department to participate in those negotiations. Well, the county didn't have anyone available, and we had to spend money to hire a consultant, and yet we don't get a discount because we didn't have those services available. So it is a little bit of a one-sided relationship.
So the question
times.
would go to the county is, why did you increase by $10,000?
A reasonable question, but unfortunately, we don't really have a very good route of appeal, because the only avenue we would have is
A
say,
fee without an appeal.
all right, we're going to,
We paid that today somewhere.
we could provide these services on our own, but there's a lot of expertise involved, and it's also part of our financial double checks. So for all of those reasons, we've kind of stuck with the status quo.
Were they
But if you have
anticipating-
suggestions about how we might be able to address this, I'm very interested.
Maybe you could ask
No,
them,
he's an elected official.
but we could ask the
We could
department.
certainly ask, why $10,000?
Well, and
They
I
must
think
be
that-
anticipating a lot more work this year.
I think that what you will see is that you will see other departments will have probably gone up similarly, and it may be covering medical. I don't know why the boost is there, but I'm sure they have a
It's a
rationale,
significant boost.
but we may not like it. Do you have other questions on the budget?
And we balance this with expenses for what purpose?
A really good question, because in general, I think a balanced budget is an important general approach, and that you want to make sure that your expenses are balancing. But it's, one of the things that's relevant to our particular budget is because we fund depreciation. If everything balances out, at the end of this coming fiscal year, we will have added $96,500 to our cash balance because we're funding depreciation. So that's one thing to consider. The other thing to consider is that there may be circumstances, which I anticipate coming up, when we're doing, say, the transfer station floor repair, and we'll need to dip into that cash balance one way or another in order to effect that repair. And so in those kind of circumstances, we will have a deficit budget for that particular fiscal year. I don't necessarily view that as a tragic problem. It's just a situation in which, on a particular year, we had more expenses than we had revenue coming in. So long as our overall trajectory is in a positive direction, I don't think that's a particular dire problem. However, still, we want to be good, prudent fiscal
So-
managers, and
Right.
that's an
So
important.
do we have a balance sheet that accompanies this proposed budget by any chance?
A balance, well, the expenses and revenues balance.
Yeah, that looked at basically the assets and liabilities.
That would be
That's in our
In the audit.
annual audit.
It's in the
That-
annual audit.
That is essentially the result
So where
of
would I see the cash
the cash.
for unforeseen expenses like the floor of the transfer station? et cetera, et
Right.
cetera?
That's
And
the problem.
that's a discussion we'll be having because, well, the short answer of it is in our regular financial reports, the sheet from the auditor is the sheet on, where 2.2, it says solid waste balance sheet. That is the balance sheet. But it's a snapshot of where we're at, and it's a cash balance, so it really doesn't deal with accrual, which is probably the more appropriate way to assess the fiscal health of our agency. So this,
So
Go
that reflects to the year-to-date, then, or close to it, February 29th, 2016.
Correct.
The cash reserves.
that's
essentially.
Is that the
correct.
161 or something?
604.
604,384.
I think there's another thing that comes into play on the solid waste budget is that from the day that solid waste opened its doors, there was a $1.2 million, what was the
Well,
total?
we had the,
2 million?
it was, we had the liabilities associated with the landfill and the liabilities associated with the transfer station at the same time. So I believe we started somewhere like 7 million in the hole, and we've
And so
slowly
just to
been,
open the doors, we had a budget that was in the hole.
right.
Because we took on the liabilities for the county and the city, so the county could then do other projects and not be hobbled with that
So
note.
that stands at 2.1 million currently, that post-closure liability, that's what you're referring to? Okay.
Which is a good thing, it's come down a lot.
From 7.
Yeah.
Good job.
Bit by bit.
7 was the two combined.
That's
right?
correct.
But
The
still,
transfer station and the.
That's correct. And when we're paying off the transfer station, and we're addressing the landfill liabilities as well. But we still, in terms of assets,
so we always will look out of balance there. because
still
we-
digging ourselves out of a hole.
Let's keep digging.
Is that it on questions?
Yes, yes, Chair.
Anyone else? I have a couple too, so that's why I was waiting.
I just have
patiently.
one. On the, back to your PowerPoint, is your OPEB is only $11,000?
That's how much we're paying. It's not the total amount it's not the total amount of the calculated assessed obligations. It's the amount that we're paying in. Like most municipalities, we're not paying the full amount because we haven't had time to address the totality and complexity of the issues, and so we're kind of following the lead of everybody else. However, I believe that we're paying a greater proportion into that than, say, the county is this year.
You are.
So have we addressed the new accounting figures for all those things as far as what percentages we're required to pay in now? The authority, I know we did as a city with GASB 68 or whatever.
We are addressing
whatever
that.
is.
Our treasurer, Mr. Taylor, has been rather consumed with taxis, and I'm assuming that we'll be seeing more of him in May and June.
Okay,
Is that it?
that's it.
Okay, I'm going to go back to the 30490 for the depreciation expense. Because I'm very concerned that the auditor has a different interpretation than we do. We're looking at those dollars and saying, okay, when the transfer station floor is failing, we get to replace that floor with this depreciation money. And his interpretation is no, it's 100% replacement. So it's like if the building fell down or something. And so then I'm asking, well, where in our line can we put that? Because we're putting in that depreciation amount based on our debt. But our debt is not our debt. Our debt is shared with the city and the county, who are not sharing that depreciation line. We are holding it all, which is fine because we want to protect the county. But at the same time, we have to have the ability to know that we're going to reach into that for repairs or catastrophic events, or we're going to need to turn to the county and the city and say, hey, a third, because this belongs to, the liabilities. So somehow we need to get, I would like to actually have a letter on file from the auditor explaining why this happens and giving a recommendation as to how we are going to be able to reach to the transfer floor. Because I'm worried that people don't realize that if the transfer floor fails, solid waste fails. We can't have that happen. Because Hambros needs that surface to be able to skim their machinery over and get all of it done, and we know that the floor is failing. So I would ask us to really push hard on this, because last time that's where the confusion was. And I looked at some other JPAs in our adopted budget that don't have a depreciation expense line. And it's like, wait a minute. Why does one JPA have it and another JPA not? I haven't heard back. I've asked the auditor to answer that question. And it could be for a myriad of reasons, I don't know. But I'm just trying to figure out a way, because we have to be able to get to those dollars and not just hold depreciation dollars until we pay back the loan, because it's the loan that makes us look as if we don't have the assets that we really have. So it's kind of a financial.
Thank you for highlighting that issue. I totally concur.
I've been
that that's an
grappling with it
issue we
because
have
it's
to
so-
talk through, and because the auditor and our treasurer controller are both helping us make sure that we follow all of the appropriate financial rules. My plan was shortly after we got a moment, we would get together and talk about
So I
how
don't know-
exactly we can do this.
I don't know if there's someone, if you want to do it with just them, or if you want to have a commissioner with you. Would you like to do it as an ad hoc with them?
That would be terrific. Maybe you and I can do that as an ad hoc.
Okay.
Okay, I'll
The
take that.
other thing that, excuse me, if I could be recognized, the other thing that Chris was starting to mention was, he said, I wouldn't mind having a special meeting. So, versus having an ad hoc, possibly having a special meeting with the auditor and whoever else.
And I wanted to take these things one at a time. And so one of the things that we haven't done, for example, is we haven't really even had the full discussion of what my research has found regarding other transfer station floor repairs, background about how we would approach it, preliminary discussions about how we would go about drafting up the engineering specs. And that would be all necessary before we could really come to a cost estimate of what we were looking at. Until we got to the cost estimate, then in some ways the discussion about how we're going to approach the financing is a little premature. So I was just trying to take it one step at a time.
I
but-
just want clarity there, because I want to be building that money that we know that we're saving for the transfer station, but I don't want our budget to be sliced thin by the swords of the Board of Supervisors saying, why did you take the money out of there? Because that's the only place we put the money, because you owe the money. I mean,
I really appreciate this discussion, and if it's okay with you, I'll take that as the establishment of an ad hoc committee to discuss the financing of the
so
transfer
maybe
station
if
floor
instead
repair.
of, if Eli's wanting a special meeting, maybe he could be with you on the budget, and then it would come back, and it would be good to have it at large, and then you guys come back and report to us, and we can then pound it out. Will that work? Okay. So it's going to be Eli and Chris will be the ad hoc to solve the depreciation expense mystery.
All right, thank you.
And then on a future meeting, maybe you could fill us in what Martha already knows about the condition of the transfer station floor, since I'm not privy to that discussion at this time, so. maybe-
That will be probably on the next meeting agenda.
Okay, good.
Because the annual depreciation cost is a drop in the bucket of what it's going to cost to
That's
fix that floor.
correct.
That's the other part of the problem.
We're looking at $600,000 or $700,000.
Yeah.
So, do we bank, in a year where you don't draw any of it, where is that placed then?
It goes into the cash balance.
Just it goes into the cash balance?
So that's part of that 600,000.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Madam Chair, as far as this ad hoc committee, are we just restricted to the depreciation expense, or can we discuss the budget as
Oh, I think you
large?
should take the whole thing
Okay,
on.
that's
don't-
fine.
No?
Well, the reason why
Well,
my eyes
probably
were...
not with the auditor. Probably not with the auditor and that piece of it, but it wouldn't hurt to have an ad hoc budget committee that could comb the budget and then meet with Ted and talk. Would that work?
Yeah, what I was getting at is, in some of the items that Chris brought up, there were expenses that were dealing with the city and expenses dealing with the county. So generally, there's quite a few issues that I think we should try to identify, and then maybe, from there, start a dialogue with those two entities, but at least identify them through the ad hoc committee. That these are city and county expenses that maybe can be worked out, because we're all members of the same organization.
Winnow them down a little bit. So the direction to the ad hoc committee is to please meet with the auditor and city manager. Did you have city manager there too, or just auditor? To go over the depreciation expense.
The auditor, the treasurer, controller,
Okay, so the
myself.
auditor, the treasurer, controller. And then to also meet with the director to review the budget if there are any other areas where we could enter negotiations locally to reduce cost.
Sounds great.
Okay. Do we need to, I think we probably need to take action.
For this budget?
Well, maybe not if we've gone to ad hoc as the draft. So you will need to bring.
Action would be helpful to me in that I am required under the JPA to present a budget, a draft proposed budget to the city and the county. And since that will happen between this meeting and the next meeting, then I'd like approval that this would be okay, or some sequence of events. Maybe I need to meet with the ad hoc first.
Can we present it as a preliminary draft?
We can, but their comments, the sequence is, we have today's meeting, we have the city council meeting and the board of supervisors meeting. They have an opportunity to make comments, and then it'll come back to the authority board meeting where you'll be looking to either approve it or give us direction so that we can get it approved before the end of June.
And in the interim, the ad hoc committee would also have eyes on it.
That would be fine.
Then I would ask that there be a motion to adopt this agenda as a draft agenda to be presented to the Board of Supervisors and the City Council. A draft budget. What did I say, agenda? Sorry. So is there a motion to that effect?
I'll move that we accept this draft budget and we have our ad hoc committee look at it, as also the city and the county look at it, and then bring it back in the next meeting.
Fair enough, I'd second that motion.
There's been a motion and a second. Is there any public discussion on this item? Bringing it back, I will ask if there's any additional comment by the commissioners. Poll the vote, please.
Commissioner Naffa?
Yes.
Commissioner Gastineau?
Yes.
Commissioner McClure?
Yes.
Commissioner Inscore?
Yes.
Commissioner Howard?
Yes.
Thank you, and thank you for such a detailed discussion of the budget. Really one of the healthiest discussions we've had on that.
In a long
So thank you.
time. 6.2 is the discussion of possible action regarding the second amended JPA agreement between the City of Crescent City and Del Norte County and the Solid Waste Management Authority.
As you are generally aware, there was a suggestion initially from Supervisor Finnegan to make some modifications to the Joint Powers Authority agreement, and we brought those suggestions to the city and the county respectively. And what you have before you is a revised, a second amended Joint Powers Agreement that's in a red line version, so you can see the exact changes that have been proposed. So on page 3, we added a whereas. In March 2016, both the Del Norte County Board of Supervisors and the City Council of the City of Crescent City took advisory votes regarding potential changes to the first amended Joint Powers Agreement. And then the detailed changes, some of them occur on page 6, detailing how the public member is approved. And then we have changes on page 9, detailing that any ordinances of the governing board of the Solid Waste Authority that address issues other than customer rates or contract or service fees must be approved by a majority vote of both the City Council and the Board of Supervisors before the ordinance may be adopted. So that enables the authority to adopt rate ordinances without having approval by the city or the county. And then under page 10, we have additional changes to the budget approval process. After preparation of the budget, the Del Norte Solid Waste Management Authority shall transmit a copy of the proposed budget to the County Chief Administrative Officer and City Manager of each charter member. Each party shall promptly review the proposed DNSWAMA budget and may agendize a discussion of the proposed DNSWAMA budget on a regular meeting agenda for that charter member. And then the comments regarding that would need to be submitted in writing on or before the 15th day of May. And then the party would be expected to have a representative to the authority meeting to discuss those proposed comments. And if they don't appear, then that would be viewed as a retraction of those comments. And those are the only proposed changes, apart from the signature page on page 16. But
So what I would need is a motion to approve the second amendment of the Joint Powers Agreement and turn it over to the city and the county.
Let's make that motion.
Oh, public comment, I'm sorry. I'll bring it back to the board. The motion is to approve the second amended joint powers agreement between the City of Crescent City, the County of Del Norte, and the Solid Waste Management Authority.
Yes.
Is there a second?
I just have a question before we go to a second.
Just a point of order. If I don't
All
have a
right.
second, you can change the
Okay.
subject. So do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, good. Now we are open for discussion.
All right, so my discussion is like, if there's comments from either the Board of Supervisors or the City of Crescent City, they have to bring in another representative that would be for our board, is that what?
If there are comments regarding the budget, that's
Right.
correct.
Okay, and so, I'm just thinking the smart way would be one of our representatives would bring that forward from the dais. I don't understand why we have to have a third party come in. I guess the city manager or, yeah.
So the idea is a staff person would come in.
Correct.
A representative. The idea being that just as we just discussed the budget and you just gave preliminary approval, the presumption is if there's somebody who objects to it, you either already spoken or they didn't get a chance to speak. So probably the objection would come from a different party associated with the county or the city, and then would want to make that comment clarified for the board so that you could then decide about the budget that you're responsible for.
All right, just one clarification.
I just have another, I mean, if we're making, there was one item of this where the Board of Supervisors and the City Council had a different take on that. So which are we doing?
That was
restricted.
with respect to item 1, if
Yeah.
you look on page 2 of the staff report.
Right.
So the question was, with respect to how the authority's annual budget is approved, which of the following options would be preferred? The majority of the Board of Supervisors recommended that the authority would transmit the draft budget in March or April to the city manager and CAO, and if either the City Council or Board of Supervisors could agendize that for discussion during the first 2 weeks of May. Official comments must be written and presented at the authority meeting, and the authority posts public notice and adopts by June 30th. The City Council preferred by a unanimous vote that the authority drafts and adopts its own budget without involvement of the Crescent City Council or the Del Norte County Board of Supervisors, and the authority adopts it by June 30th. So essentially, the second amended JPA as currently drafted went with the more conservative of those two options, which is giving the city and the county the opportunity to agendize the authority budget if they so choose to do so.
But not required.
Okay.
I'm okay with that.
Any further discussion?
I mean,
Well, yeah, I think it's prudent to do that. I just find it sort of interesting that the majority of one 5-member board ends up weighing heavier than a unanimous decision of the other member of the JPA.
And
It's just interesting to me.
maybe I could nudge it on a little bit, because in a conversation with me with Ted, it was like, I just need to get over this part because we've got so much good work to do. I want to get these mechanics all cleared up, and
Agreed.
hopefully the city would say, you know, it's okay that it's our option instead of
I'm
us.
sure the city would be,
Yeah.
city would be happy.
But that
to
was,
yield
so
to the county.
I'll take that shoulder bearing there as far as.
and also, it is the most conservative, and it's not changing
I
what we're
agree.
already doing now, so it's not a big change. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think to be fair, and Chair mentioned as supervisor during that discussion, you know, there's still quite a bit of interest in this.
Yeah.
And I think we did take that conservative approach, and I agree with the direction that's being had now. Subsequently, that's why I made the motion today.
Awesome.
Any further discussion? Will you poll the vote, please?
Good stuff.
Commissioner Howard,
Yes.
Commissioner Inscore,
Yes.
Commissioner McClure,
Yes.
Commissioner Gastineau,
Yes.
Commissioner Naffa.
Yes.
Okay, that concludes our public session. And now I think our, council, are you going to take us into closed session, or we just go into closed session? And will I anticipate a report out at the end of closed session?
We will have at least one report out.
Well, at least a report out if we decided it rose to the
Right, and we can also receive any public comment at this time on closed session matters, which again will be regarding anticipated litigation and threat to public services or facilities.
Anyone want to take a stab in the dark? Usually we like to make them a little clearer, but that's good. Okay, then we will adjourn to closed session. Thank you all for attending. Come up with good ideas on how we're going to reduce, recycle, and reuse.